informed public policy, catalyzed investments, and most importantly, inspired the promulgation of our new constitution. As Vision 2030 approaches its horizon, our responsibility is not simply to replace it with another government document or plan. Our responsibility is far greater under the 2010 Constitution. That is, to craft a new national development charter that gives effect to the development imperatives enshrined in the Constitution and to decide together what kind of Kenya we want to build over the next generation and beyond. That conversation belongs to each one of us and to all of us. But before we decide where we should go next, we must first reflect honestly on the journey we have traveled. Since our independence more than 6 decades ago, the world has witnessed 3 great waves of industrialization and economic transformation, and Kenya has stood at the threshold of each one of them. Each wave lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, transformed low-income economies into high-income nations, and created new prosperity. The path unfolded between the 1960s and 80s. It involved the East Asian tigers, including South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, which transformed themselves into prosperous, high-income, industrialized economies. The second was in the late 1970s. China, together with Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and Mauritius, embarked on bold economic reforms that lifted hundreds of millions of their citizens out of poverty and transformed their economies into globally competitive manufacturing and investment hubs. The third wave began in the early 90s. Vietnam, India, Bangladesh, and Cape Verde embraced reforms, expanded exports, attracted investments, and fundamentally changed the trajectory of their economies within one generation. All these major developments, but we did not take full advantage of them. In 1965, for example, Kenya and South Korea each had a GDP per capita of approximately $110. Today, South Korea exceeds $36,000 compared to ours of $2,400, a multiple of 15. In 1980, when China began its economic reforms, its GDP per capita stood at approximately $200. Kenya's was then $450. China overtook us, and today has a GDP per capita exceeding $14,000, a multiple of 6 compared to ours. When Vietnam embarked on economic reforms in the early 90s, Vietnam's income per person was roughly half ours. Today, Vietnam's GDP per capita stands at approximately $5,000, more than double ours. Bangladesh has followed a similar remarkable path. Even more sobering is the fact that we are now being challenged by countries much closer to home. Ghana's GDP per capita is about $3,200, roughly 30% higher than ours. While Zimbabwe, after enduring decades of profound economic hardship, has recovered to a GDP per capita of about $3,000, now slightly exceeding ours. The question we must ask ourselves candidly and honestly is why other nations have fulfilled so much of their potential while we have repeatedly fallen short. More importantly, what must we now do differently to ensure that the next chapter of Kenya's development story is fundamentally different from the last? Fellow citizens, there is, however, some good news. We can, we must, and we shall together get it right this time round. History rarely announces the arrival of defining moments. Yet there are occasions when the forces shaping the world create opportunities that come perhaps once in a generation. I believe we are on the threshold of one such historic moment. I believe so for 4 compelling reasons. First, 4 years ago, our priority as a nation was not to imagine Kenya's next chapter. It was to survive global economic turbulence, restore stability, rebuild